let's actually talk about principle number one today, and that is the boundary principle. This is what you write in the book. A boundary is the recognized demarcation between insiders or members and outsiders. This boundary should be more about making the inside space safe for insiders than about keeping outsiders out. Where there's a boundary, insiders feel more confident that they share values and that they understand one another better than outsiders. And I actually want to talk about an example that you use in the book, because I think this example does a great job of illustrating what you're talking about here. And that is this example of firefighters. Can you tell us the story and how that illustrates the boundary principle?
Absolutely. Just to clarify, the role of the boundary, I've noticed that we live in an era where many people have a mistaken belief, formed from a very generous orientation, but nonetheless mistaken, that if we're building community, we need to invite everybody to everything all the time. And that just doesn't work. And the firefighter example is going to illustrate that. One of the ways we know that that's not a good way to build a community is if we're investing to create community and having that grow amongst a certain group of people that we care about. If we don't have a boundary on who's invited in or who's in and who's out, then we don't know who we're investing in, because there's several billion people on this planet, and you nor I, Seth, can invest to knit together 4 billion people by ourselves. So we need to know, well, who are these people? And we can pick any standard we want, but it can't be everybody all the time. And I talk about the firefighters in the book. I interviewed a fire captain from New Haven, Connecticut. Her name is Melissa. She was the first woman firefighter in the long history of the New Haven Fire Department. And she shared with me that over a career firefighting, obviously firefighters are exposed to very sober and grim experiences and scenes, literally confronting death. And she shared with me that one of the things that comes out of that is firefighters develop a very dark sense of humor, which in part helps them process and live with the very sober things that they're experienced to. She shared with me that it's so dark that they know that non-firefighters can't handle it. And if they don't understand this culture of firefighters who are exposed to this sober stuff, it's just going to seem sick and offensive. And so she explained how firefighters use this dark humor when there are only firefighters in the room. And she shared how if there's a firefighter gathering and somebody brings one spouse, the presence of that one spouse will radically change the conversation that can and will happen at that gathering. Keep in mind, it has nothing to do with whether they like that spouse. It has nothing to do whether spouses are important to firefighters. Absolutely nothing to do with that. It's just that the presence of an outsider who doesn't fully understand the emotional toll of being a firefighter and the dark humor that grows out of that is not going to be welcome to that kind of conversation. And so the whole conversation has to change. So I hope this is a great example that we need to create spaces for communities we want to knit together that are set aside. And it doesn't mean that the people who aren't invited aren't liked, aren't important in our lives, aren't people we want to see a lot of. It's just that many cases when we're bringing people together, it's not okay to bring everybody to every event at every time. And as I like to say, we can like those people, we can be friends with them, but this event is not right for them here and now.
And I've read this as part of your book, but I want to reiterate it. This is what you mean when you say the exclusion is not about keeping people out. It's about making the people who are inside feel safe. In other words, making those firefighters, putting them in a place where they feel comfortable being able to talk to other people. And you even say in the book, they have shorthand, they have words they use that only each other will understand, or certain examples or principles. I think about it in another scenario. I recently went to an event. It's called 50 First Jokes, and it involves a bunch of stand-up comedians. And the whole idea in stand-up comedy is that it's not something that you can just sit there and write your material on your own. You got to go out and actually try it in front of people. And the first time you tell jokes, they often don't work. They get sort of workshopped and wordsmithed over time. And this idea of 50 first jokes, it's 50 comedians that get up and write the very first joke that they have written of the year. And some of them are great, and some of them just completely bomb, but the audience is okay with it because it's a safe space. They're all on the inside. They all understand that their reaction is helping those comedians get better. And so it's okay for them to be inside in that place. And so I see this principle now that you talk about it in so many other places that are out there.
Just to provide some depth into this, that insider knowledge, you were referring to the fact that comedians know that writing funny jokes is hard. So the early jokes aren't that great. That insider knowledge we call esoteric knowledge. It's not an important term to know, but that's what we call it. And esoteric knowledge is very important for knitted communities because it frees us up to talk about the things that we want to talk about in a more deep level without having to on-ramp or warm up a visitor. And that's another reason why the boundary is important is I just, as media makers, we want to get in. We already know how the economic models work. We already know how distribution models work. We already understand how IP works. We don't want to have the basic conversations. We want to get into the deep stuff with our esoteric knowledge. And I'm delighted you have a good example of that. I was a professional documentary filmmaker for many years. And when I went to graduate school, the film department at the university invited me to many events because I was one of the few former professional filmmakers on campus. And they were delighted to have me, and I could share the perspective of being a real filmmaker in the world. And I remember an Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker was invited to campus, and there was supposed to be a small gathering of people to spend time with him. And they were all supposed to be people who were already familiar with the film world. And somebody had brought a friend who was a law student, as a matter of fact. And that law student asked this Academy Award-winning filmmaker all kinds of basic questions about film, about revenue models and distribution models and production, all of which were questions that a professional filmmaker would already know because that's just a buy-in to understand how the industry works. And that student didn't know that she had hijacked what could have been a high-level conversation, asking what were very basic questions for us. And nobody was bold enough to say, please stop asking questions. This event isn't for you. And that person probably left thinking that was a very interesting conversation because they learned a lot. That's another great example where a group of us were stolen what could have been a really powerful conversation because the boundary wasn't strong enough. And the event was hijacked because she didn't know enough about the esoteric knowledge to allow us to have a more complex conversation. A great example where this was a friend of one of the attendees. That person's not bad. We don't want to see them. They shouldn't be kept away from filmmakers. But because there was a not very good boundary, the event was kind of ruined for those of us who showed up because we didn't want to hear rudimentary, filmmaking answers.
And these examples are really helpful because it helps illustrate what we mean by this.